because it wouldn't have been a possible thing to create.
So the possibility of it existing exists, of the thought existing, but what is that? But not necessarily. But does the
Right, and then
possibility of the thought existing imply that the possibility of the realization of the thought could exist?
so I mean, yeah. So outside time, there's no possibility. There's no possible this and possible that because it's already there. Um, so I'd say if there's a possibility of it being done, it already has been, like in a metaphysical world somewhere. Because if there's a possibility of it to you, then like there has to be the creator of the possibility, which is somewhere else, which has already allowed for that possibility and already contemplated that possibility, which isn't a possibility where it is. It would just be there already, kind of thing.
Right.
I don't know if that
So
makes sense, but
no, I understand what you're saying. So then, what was the act of will?
um, for the
And
metaphysical thing or for
that
us?
idea, the act of will, is simply the act of observation of that which already exists.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So Plotinus thinks that being and thinking are equivalent. So everything in some sense is thinking, even what we would call non-thinking things, just objects. Like they're thinking themselves, or like they're not thinking themselves. Obviously, they don't have that sort of capacity like we do. But there's thought within them, in the sense that they're not random, like they're organized in some sense.
Right. So I think I would go the other direction. I would say that things exist because something is thinking them, not because
Right.
they're
Yeah.
thinking
So that's
themselves.
what I'm trying to get at. Is that like, there's thought within it though, like, telling it what to do and what to be, and um,
But the thought within it is I wouldn't say that the thought within it is differentiable from the thought outside of it. I think that's a false. It seems like a
right.
weak differentiation.
Right.
Yeah, but like that one right there, I was like, how can you differentiate the thought within it? Because that implies the separation between the thought outside of it, some sort of gap.
Yeah. I don't think you would make that differentiation. But ultimately, everything is trying to return to being one. So, insofar as an object is an individual, particular object, it's partaking in oneness. So when I say like this cup, like I'm saying that there is this cup as compared to another cup, and this cup has some sort of oneness within it because it's differentiable from other cups, or cup in general. If I'm just saying talking about cups, it's still partaking in one with the idea of what a cup is, and
Right.
insofar as it differentiates itself from other things. But
But
that goes back to my point earlier: is that in order for me to call something this thing, it has to be differentiable from other things. So sameness requires otherness.
right,
Um,
and it's within this specific situation, it's only differentiable. It has to be differentiable on the level of. There's a word I'm looking for, but I can't think of it. So, like the particular zoom of perception that that the meaning giver perceives on.
yeah, right.
I mean, if you zoomed in far enough to a microscopic level or something, it isn't differentiable. That's that sort of thing. Or it'd be
Yeah,
you could you could. There is a perspective from which it is not differentiable.
Uh-huh.
Might be an interesting vector of thought on this.
It's like the perspective you're talking about.
Yeah, so I'm just comparing it to like at the level of perspective that we default to, different cups are differentiable because they're differentiable on the level at which we observe things to be. I mean, basically a visible level, we can see the difference. But if you think of the way we can zoom in and use a microscope to see, muons and tiny subatomic things that at that level don't really say what the larger stuff is. And then if you go back the other way and you zoom out, just as we don't differentiate things on what their muons look like because we don't perceive at that level of
Right. Okay.
size, something on a going backwards in the same direction looking at the cups, that might not be a level of differentiation from that perspective. It might be too small from that perspective to be differentiable. Just as we wouldn't differentiate things that are smaller than what we can perceive.
Right.
So
but what's something that
perspective, the idea of differentiation gets kind of murky.
I would agree if the higher thing was also using discursive reasoning. But if it's active, then it's all the time. It's contemplating each individual thing at every level.
So it's contemplating every component of everything, as well as every meaningful combination. You're saying it's got every component of everything, as well as every meaningful combination of every component.
Yeah, depending on how we define meaning, I would think, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's a critical. You've got to figure out with that because every possible combination of components obviously isn't what we're doing, because if every possible combination of every component is what was in existence, then there would be no differentiation.
It would all just be one.
It would all be everything all at the same time.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, that's what he was saying about intellect. It is everything, all at the same time in unity, but within that unity, there's multiplicity in that there's different things in it. It's hard to call them different things.
Right.
But there are at the same time. It's very confusing.
I mean, space is required for differentiation. And so is, I don't know that time is required for differentiation. I think time is required for meaningful differentiation, but.
Right. Right. Yeah. It wouldn't be contemplating this thing over this thing at this moment. So it wouldn't be meaningful in that way. Like I can create meaning by looking at this thing in comparison to this thing at this moment, and this thing in comparison with this thing at another moment. But I'm creating meaning because I'm in time, but in doing that. Whereas
the fact that
something outside of that wouldn't have that.
Right. I mean, if you look at it from a multi-dimensional, a parallel, look at it, from like multi-dimensionality and parallel possibilities, because if you look at it as like parallel universes and you look at that theory, multiverse, that would account for, that's a way of thinking about every possible combination of every possible component all existing at the same time.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as a whole, things would not be differentiable. If you look at the whole thing, not from within it.
Right.
It's
yeah,
everything.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So only from within it is it differential. Is anything differentiable?
Which we're capable of doing.
Right.
To some extent, yeah.
There's some sort of, but at the same time, there has to be some sort of, I feel like there has to be some sort of almost intentional framework in order for that to even be possible. Because there's no reason for it to be inherently possible to differentiate.
Uh-huh.
It's an interesting thought. I don't see
that's a good one to think about.
Because what is the reason for differentiation? I don't see any inherent cause or reason for differentiation. Something had to make differentiation exist.
Yeah.
Better. Possible.
So, in order for there to be differentiation, there has to be number. Number is required, I think.
I mean, that in and of itself is differentiation.
Yeah, that would be like defining what it is almost.
Yeah, because if you can say there is an amount, then if there's a quantity, that implies a singular definable thing.
So if that number goes on for infinity, like an actual infinity, which is what intellect contemplates, like an actual infinite number of things.
Right.
Is there differentiation if there's an actual infinite? Or is it all one?
Is mathematically it would be defined no, because it can expand and it can go in as many directions. You can't, if you're thinking about the real numbers, there is no, if you're talking about quantity, which I guess would be different. If you're talking about quantity, which is defined in natural numbers, then you could have an infinite quantity while still having a definable one, or a definable segments.
Mm-hmm.
Because quantity implies differentiation.
So we're saying that intellect is multiple, and that there are many primary principles of sorts. Number is not primary because masses and magnitudes are not primary. For there to be a mass or a magnitude of something, there has to be more than one, so it's not primary.
Well, now a magnitude is different. Well, you've got to have a scale to measure magnitude, but I think you could almost imply the idea of a magnitude is what is, but it only means anything with relation to some sort of measurable dimension. But magnitude doesn't require
what's metaphysical
comparison.
wouldn't have magnitude.
Measurement requires comparison. The idea of magnitude, I would say, does not require comparison. The idea of quantity requires comparison.
The idea of quantity requires comparison?
Yeah. The idea of magnitude doesn't really, because magnitude is self-referential.
So he said, what is called number in the intelligible world and the dyad are rational principles. So like number itself is one of those principles. And intellect, but the dyad is indefinite when one forms an idea of it by what may be called the substrate.